August 1924, 4 years of marriage. And what had it got him? It wasn't as if Thomas Barrow wanted anything in particular when he married me Lucina Ashby. He had had some money, after all, and she had given him more. But now it had been recalled, and that which he had spent on his treatment had been reverted to debt. If his lordship ever found out, or Carson, he might well be dismissed without a reference. If that was the case, he would never find work again. Thomas was hardly able to recall how his letter from the solicitors about his debt, of him using money that had been confiscated by a jury because of a dispute over Marconi's patents, had got into his drawer. The last time he had seen it was at the breakfast table, and now, there it was. But there had been a lot of that recently, and Thomas put it down to the pain in his body, from the use of the medicine to cure himself. Thomas Barrow told himself that he needed to be stronger in himself, to endure it. It had got him no further on than in 1920. Worse still, he had a wife, someone to whom, at some level, he had to answer to, as she him. Which is why he knew that it must pain her deeply about the visit to Germany with her colleagues. How had he not seen that Milo would change as she had grown? She was no longer a girl, and that was the problem. And, of course, Thomas could not divorce her for the reason he had given to Chadwick. Questions would be asked, answers would be sought. So Thomas had chosen to try to eliminate the source of the questions and answers. His homosexuality was the cause of so many problems, Thomas reasoned, for so many things. What would it be like, no longer attracted to men? Would he just be attracted to no one, or would women become an interest? Up to now, nothing seemed to have changed, apart from the rest of his physiology. He had become horrendously tired from the treatment, and he had, from the injection site, above his hip, a serious infection. No amount of lancing had done any good. In fact, it had probably made matters worse. So when Lady Rose flitted like an eager butterfly around Downton because of her upcoming wedding, and Jack Prue had, at last, told Thomas that he was leaving the cottage and was returning to Ireland, Thomas Barrow steeled himself, and retired the minute he could. The treatment was not making him feel well, Thomas decided. But if it converted him to being a man who did not like other men, that was the point. Instead, Thomas wrote a letter to Milo, asking her more about her visit to Germany and to let him know her address. And he sent her a book for their anniversary, a book of Rudyard Kipling's works, which he had managed to get signed by the man when Lady Rose saw what he had and knew someone in London who knew Kipling. The book had been a precious one. It was one of the only things Ernest had ever given to him. "You will visit her, of course, won't you, Barrow?" asked Lady Rose, concerned. "Or, she can come here?" "She will come if you ask her," Thomas told Rose, although he was not entirely convinced himself. "Then I will ask her," she told him. But when no letter had come back to her, Lady Rose cornered Thomas again. "Another plan?" she asked him. "Is there anything you can think of that will induce her to visit?" Out of the corner of his eye, Thomas saw a fleeting glance of Tom Branson, Sibby in hand, walking around the corner of Downton, under the trees. Not offhand, he thought, grimly, though plenty to keep her away. Then, Thomas noticed Lord Grantham in the company of the War Memorial Committee, Carson walking with them, and he mentioned this to Rose. "Oh, yes," she exclaimed. "Although I do believe all relatives will receive a letter." And she will have received that, Thomas thought. But it wouldn't necessarily encourage her to come. "Lady Rose," Thomas confided, "may I speak discreetly?" And she directed them along a path, feigning to show him flowers and shrubs while Thomas told her that Milo had not yet recovered from her accident. "While 2 years have passed," he began, "the night has stuck with her. You see, while she is brilliant, her mind is not the same as most people." Rose drew to a stop, and fixed Thomas with a stare. "I believe there is more," she told him, frankly. "But, I do not wish to know it, if it is painful for her." Then Lady Rose began to walk a little further, so the garden walk took them to the generator building, and Thomas supposed they would end up at the Keacon yard and the garages soon after. What if ... what if Cousin Robert were to write to her, you know, like a special invitation. He doesn't have to know the details, maybe that she feels awkward about coming. That is indeed true, I dare say, Thomas conceded. Perhaps you could discover if the commit have received a reply from her in the first place? Lady Rose turned to him. No, they haven't, she told him. I know this, because I saw the list of names, mothers and wives mainly, on the table in the library yesterday. Cousin Robert was going through plans for the service with Carson. Then a direct invitation from his lordship sounds like a very good plan, my lady, Thomas told her, and it might work. 88,888,888 Thomas, you look terrible my friend, Prue told him, a rare acknowledgement from the man, where they usually talked of Ireland and drank whiskey. So many times when Thomas thought he understood the situation in that country, he realized he hadn't, so much relied on the history of the country, and long, broad unseeing bonds which had been, clearly, ignored or disrupted over the centuries, like tree roots being hacked at by a thoughtless farmer. That is my business, Thomas told him, taking up the whiskey. I tell you, Prue, I will miss this, when you have gone. It has a taste like no other. Prue smiled at him over a lead crystal tumbler, one of Harold Ashby's, Thomas reasoned, for little had changed in the kitchen since his death and Milo's inheritance of the cottage. Inheritance with a caveat, that being a guardian. And Thomas had taken the chance where others might not. Or rather, where one had tried, and failed. Would that she would come, Prue told him. I may have been back in my country by now, but I am holding out for her. She deserves this thing to be finished. And so does he, Branson, of course. And it touched Thomas that Prue, once Milo's grandmother's butler from their life for Tenniscorthy, in a grand house, now fire-ruined, was such a staunch ally of Milo's. Irish stuck together, that was true, but rallied more at an injustice, especially an injustice of one of their own. Perhaps if I were to write, to say you would see her, Thomas suggested. But Prue shook his head. I am risking my life going back. I do not wish the British spy network to discover where I have been bunking down for the last few years. It would do no good for Downton, nor me Lucina, nor you. And Thomas supposed he was right. A staunch de Valero enemy, and coordinator of the New Republic's army in Ireland, Prue, not his real name of course, had been hiding out until the heat was down enough for him to go back. And things were settling. The Free State had its leader. Britain had accepted Ireland's new status as a country within the empire, free to make its own decisions, but not entirely free. Thomas could see that men like Prue still had a long way to go for true independence. So Thomas had drunk whiskey and, in the early hours of a refreshing summer Sunday morning, crept back into Downton and up to the bathroom at the top of the house. Get the injection over and done with, he reasoned, get the sick feeling over and done with, and by lunchtime he would be in a position he could cope with the cold, groggy feeling of the medicine doing his work. But he had not been prepared to find Ms. Baxter pushing her way in through the door as he was about to press the injection into his body. Thomas cursed her away, but she stood there, lock closed, staring at him defiantly. Because I want to suppress my feelings for men, Thomas told her, when Baxter asked him why he was doing it to himself. Can I not be what she needs? He held the syringe in his hand and sank to the edge of the bath. She writes to me of HB, he snarled, then glared back to Baxter. They are supposed to be looking after her. They will be, Miss Baxter told him, and she has asked you to trust her. Milo cannot help if a man is interested in her, such as you cannot help being interested in other men. And she persuaded Thomas to skip his injection that morning, and see if the inflammation would pass. You seem to have a great deal on your mind, Miss Baxter, Mr. Millsley told her, later. I am worried about Thomas, she told him, as they stood in the yard, taking the evening air. If you are, I am sorry to say you might just about be the only one, he told her. But Phyllis Baxter shook her head. There's Milo, of course. Miss Ashby, you mean? Millsley clarified. Why her? Don't wives usually care about their husband's well-being? Millsley gave her an astonished look, especially when their husband's well-being had been told to them by a friend, which is what Miss Baxter had signed the letter as, when she wrote to tell her of the debt. You sure? He said, confused. "A lot of people seem to know," Miss Baxter replied, as vaguely as she could. "She never said," Wellesley told her. "I walked her to the station, you know. I saw her off to Cambridge." Miss Baxter smiled. Would they ever make it further than friends, her and Joseph Wellesley? He took some time to catch on to things, and things of the heart even more so. "I know, Mr. Wellesley," Miss Baxter told him, kindly. "Now, would you help me with moving her ladyship's chest of drawers?" And that afternoon, with the luck of the gods, she managed to persuade Thomas Barrow to visit the Downton hospital to see Dr. Clarkson, and finally put an end to the horrific injections he had been submitting himself to. 88,888,888 you came. Freddie Bonner, solicitor and Thomas Barrow's cousin, looked over the edges of his circular spectacle frames. "Is there anything that wasn't clear?" "It said to see you if anything wasn't clear," Thomas told him. Freddie put down his pen, patiently. "What would you like me to explain?" he asked, kindly. "My fee has been paid. There is no need to worry about that." "Your fee?" repeated Thomas, now totally confused. It had been about a week after Miss Baxter had persuaded him to the doctors and he felt so much better. And, he had taken Miss Baxter's advice to put revenge out of his head towards the quack he had bought the bogus cure from. "It will only make you feel like a fool, and you are not one," she had counseled, "only a person driven to desperation, which skewed your judgment." Thomas hadn't felt he deserved it, especially after how he had treated her since she had got to Downton, but surprisingly, it had made him feel better. It felt as if he could retain some power, something for the future, power he could keep and grew stronger as long as he did not give in to vengeance. Thomas had to admit, he had never felt that feeling before, a healthy powerfulness. Now, here he was, as a result of his cousin's letter, in York, wondering what on earth Freddie Bonner had meant. Money's paid, debt settled, Thomas had read, and now his cousin had told him his solicitor's fee was also paid. "I don't understand," Thomas admitted. And, of course, Freddie would know to whom the money had been owed. "I admit I was a fool to try to cure myself, and I believed the Marconi money was still there." That last part was a little weak, he had to admit. Only a fool would think so, a fool, or a chancer. And Thomas would rather be thought of as a fool, because being a chancer was what he had a reputation for, and he didn't like it. "It has been paid, all of it," Freddie told him, simply. "By who?" A simple question. His cousin leaned over to him, and smiled softly. "I can't tell you that, but it has saved you," he told Thomas. So, as he walked to the railway station, Thomas wished himself a happy birthday. 88,888,888 And there was more news that evening. Prue had sent a message to Downton to ask Thomas to come to see him. But it was not the canny Irishman who answered the door, but Milo. "Whatever are you doing here?" Thomas asked her, though she did not answer immediately, but put out her hand. He took it, and they made their way into the sitting room where Prue had already poured out drinks. "I came when I got Lord Grantham's letter," Milo told him, looking unsure of herself, and vulnerable. Her skin was pale, and her eyes damp. It looked as if she might have been crying. "For the memorial tomorrow." "I couldn't come to the house," she added, and Thomas felt a lurch of pain in his chest, his mind imagining what had gone on that night when Tom Branson had forced himself on her in a desperate effort to claim her money. "But Jack tells me he has a plan." "He has a plan," Thomas told her, "but I don't know much about it," he added, glancing to Prue. "I do," Milo told him, and then turned to Prue. "Jack," she told him, "I have considered all the implications of the Glamdison, and I will take the Troscad.